I'm Carol Decker. I am the chair of our West Newbury Open Space Committee. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you tonight. Our Open Space Committee has worked extensively with our land trust, Essex County Greenbelt. And Patricia Reeser, who is on the committee, is the one who really has worked with Greenbelt to put this workshop together. You know, we wanted a workshop where property owners, just like all of you, could gain insight and guidance on how to protect your land. I'm really excited with the presentations that will be happening tonight and all the tools that will be available and shared with all of us here, along with the expertise, so we can start looking at our lands and how do we protect them. With us here tonight, both who are invaluable in helping set this up, is Vanessa Johnson-Hall, the Director of Land Conservation for Greenbelt. And you've already met Elizabeth Harkness out in the hallway, also Greenbelt Land Conservation Specialist. So both here, along with some other Greenbelt staff, to answer lots of questions. I would also like to thank Rebecca Ombre with our West Newbury Town, Brian Richards for the room setup, and Adam Stone for recording. You're welcome to continue with those refreshments, lots of those delightful pastries to just say, ooh, come and grab one. And these have all been provided by Greenbelt, so thank you. Also, this presentation will be recorded up until the question and answer session. I think we'll keep this presentation moving. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. Quite a crowd. I'm really honored that you made it out here on a frigid winter night. I'm Vanessa Johnson-Hall, the Director of Land Conservation at Essex County Greenbelt Association. I'm here with Elizabeth Harkness, who's also a Land Conservation Specialist at Greenbelt. And I think right at the door is Julia Fitzpatrick, a second Land Conservation Specialist at Greenbelt as well. So also feel free to ask them questions. Joining us this evening as my co-presenters are Jim Monahan from Landvest and Peter Bernardin from the Bernardin Law Firm. I know we had advertised another attorney, but she failed. So I'm very grateful that Peter was able to fill in. We've known the Bernardin Law Firm a long time. They've worked with a lot of landowners, and I'm really grateful that Peter was able to fill in at the last minute. So Jim Monahan is a senior advisor with the real estate consulting group Landvest, where he oversees residential and commercial appraisals, development feasibility studies, land use planning, and conservation-based development projects. His expertise focuses on the design, valuation, and implementation of land disposition strategies for privately held properties, often in the context of generational and estate planning. Peter Bernardin is a Massachusetts probate attorney with over 20 years of experience helping families protect and preserve their assets. His practice includes estate planning, estate and trust administration, elder law, business planning, and real estate. And Peter is also a certified public accountant. We are also joined here this evening by Paulina Swartz and Annie Madden, who are Greenbelt board members, but also conservation restriction donors, and they will offer a few words before our question and answer session just about why they preserve their land. So without further ado, what I'm hoping you'll get out of this session this evening is understanding a bit more about who Greenbelt is, the types of land that we preserve, the tools that are available to preserve your land permanently, because we're in the permanent conservation business, some of the financial incentives that might be available to you if you preserve your land, how to understand your land's financial value, that's why we brought Jim in here, and also how land conservation may help you with your estate planning goals, which we have Peter here to help elaborate on as well. Greenbelt is the only land trust that focuses exclusively on Essex County. Since we were founded in 1961, we've preserved over 22,600 acres of land. We preserve the places that grow our food, our working farms, the places that keep our air and water clean, the places that preserve our native wildlife, and the places where our families and all of us can enjoy the outdoors for free. There are really two primary land conservation tools available to permanently preserve your land. The first is donating or selling what's called a conservation restriction on your land, and the second is donating or selling your land to a qualified conservation organization such as Greenbelt. What is a conservation restriction? A conservation restriction, and I don't like to read my slides, but I'm going to read the definition because I don't trust myself to have memorized this. It's a great definition. It's a voluntary, permanently binding legal agreement that forever limits the type and amount of development on your land in order to protect your land's conservation values. With a conservation restriction, you keep owning your land. It's just a blanket of protection on top of your land, that you keep ownership of it. You retain the rights to use your lands in all the ways that are compatible with protecting its natural values. These are likely the ways you're already using your land, whether it's for farming, or hunting, or harvesting wood, or walking, or nature observation. You maintain your privacy with a conservation restriction. Public access is not a requirement of the majority of conservation restrictions. You can still sell your land. That conservation restriction goes with the land forever. And Greenbelt's obligation in holding that conservation restriction is to ensure that all future landowners abide by the terms of your conservation restriction. Another way to describe conservation restrictions and what they can accomplish. Attorneys who talk about land ownership like to liken land ownership to holding a bundle of sticks, where each stick represents a right that you own when you own your land to do something on your land. So one of those sticks is to hunt, one of them is to cut wood, one of them might be to put in trails or to farm or to create wildlife habitat. Another of those sticks, depending on where you live and what your current zoning is for your property, might be to subdivide your land, to build housing on your land, to build a road, to mine gravel, if you have commercial zoning, to put up a restaurant or a hotel or a gas station. What conservation restrictions do is they take some of those sticks and burn them. They extinguish certain development rights on your land, primarily the development rights that are the least compatible with preserving the natural values of your land. Conservation restrictions are flexible. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I hesitate to count how many conservation restrictions I've worked on, but it's a lot. Every single conservation restriction that I write is different. They're based on a state model, which is based on a national conservation restriction model, but the retained rights that you reserve in that conservation restriction are tailored to your particular property and your particular needs and goals as the landowner. For example, the conservation restriction boundary does not necessarily have to follow your parcel boundary. We typically exclude an area around your home site because we don't want to restrict what you can do in your yard. You can leave out areas for future development. Maybe you want to leave out a house lot or two or more, depending on the size of your land, to sell for a future income event. Or maybe you want to reserve the right, as this landowner did, for a child or a grandchild to be able to build a residence on the property. So conservation restrictions can leave out areas for future development. So each one is customized to your particular property, your circumstances, and your goals for your land. Probably the most straightforward way to preserve your land is to donate it to an organization like Greenbelt, whose charitable mission is to preserve land. If you donate your land to Greenbelt, our charter, the reason that we are a charitable organization, means that we can never sell that land for development. If you choose to donate your land to Greenbelt, we just have to do due diligence, which we pay for, to make sure the title is clear, make sure there's no hazardous waste on the property. Typically, we have our attorney draft the deed to minimize your attorney costs. Your attorney reviews that, you sign it, and the land becomes ours. And then we preserve it forever. Many, if not most landowners, can't afford to donate their land or donate a conservation restriction. So I'll next talk about what the range of potential compensation is to help pay you for preserving your land. In some cases, we can pay you market value for your land. This is Hoyt Farm, which we preserved next door in Merrimack last year. We acquired 120 acres for $1.4 million. This is a property that ticked a lot of the conservation boxes. Extraordinary family farm, adjacent to an existing town forest, so preserving this land extended a landscape of conservation land. Beautiful forests that provide tremendous wildlife habitat. Contain the headwaters of a stream that's the drinking water supply for an adjacent town. And it's a working farm, a multi-generation working farm with phenomenal farmland soils. And part of our mission is not only to preserve wildlife habitat, but to preserve those working farms. So those conservation values enabled us to attract both the private and public funding that we needed in order to compensate this landowner to be able to buy this land from them. There's also something called a bargain sale, where you can sell your land or sell a conservation restriction on your land below market value. So it's a part sale and part charitable donation. The value that we don't pay you, you can take as a charitable donation. And I'll talk in a little bit about why that might be advantageous, more advantageous for you, perhaps, than selling your property at full market value. All right, tax benefits of conserving your land. Before I go through my 100,000-foot level tax benefits, the giant caveat is that we at Greenbelt are not tax advisors. We are not financial advisors. We urge all landowners that we work with people who are qualified to run the numbers, who understand your own financial situation and can help you maximize these tax benefits that I'm going to describe. The tax benefits that you could realize from preserving your land range from reduction in property taxes. You can take a federal or state income tax deduction, reduction in estate taxes, reductions in capital gains taxes, and Massachusetts also has a conservation land tax credit. Property taxes, these are probably the most straightforward tax benefit of preserving your land. If you sell your land or donate your land, you don't own it anymore, so you're not paying property taxes anymore. Does anybody back there want to sit down? We've got seats up front. You sure? Okay. If you have a conservation restriction on your land, remember I said it eliminates some development rights on your land, or maybe all the development rights on your land. That's going to reduce your land's value. Assessors in municipalities are supposed to take that into consideration. So your property taxes should go down when you protect your land with a conservation restriction. In reality, it varies town to town how much your land value may go down, so we encourage you to talk with your local assessor about that. Federal income tax deduction for land and conservation restriction donations. In reality, this is where the majority of landowners can gain the most tax benefits from conserving their land, depending on their income situation. If you donate your land, that land has value, as determined by a qualified appraiser, which I'll talk about and Jim will elaborate on. You can deduct that value up to 30% of your adjusted gross income starting the year of the gift, and you have 5 additional years beyond that to use up the entire deduction. So if you donate your land, you can use up that deduction over a total of 6 years. Conservation restrictions under the IRS code have a much greater potential income tax deduction benefit. When you extinguish those development rights can be valued, and the value of those development rights can become your potential income tax deduction. That's considered a donation of value to a qualified conservation organization such as Greenbelt. With a conservation restriction, you can deduct up to 50% of your adjusted gross income, and you can spread out that deduction over a total of 16 years. If you are a qualified farmer or rancher, and under the IRS code, that definition is you have to earn at least 50% of your income from farming or ranching, you can deduct up to 100% of your adjusted gross income. And again, spread that out over 16 years until that deduction is used up. So I'm going to go through a very, very simple example to illustrate this. A landowner, let's assume for these purposes that they are not a farmer or rancher, a landowner earning $50,000 a year, of course on that salary they could be a farmer or rancher. A landowner earning $50,000 a year donates a $1 million conservation restriction. So the development rights that were extinguished through that conservation restriction have been valued at $1 million. What is the total tax deduction they could realize? Remember, they can deduct up to 50% of their adjusted gross income, and they have 16 years to use that up. Anybody good at doing math in their head here? You can use your phones, like I do. The answer is that can generate a total of $400,000 in deductions. Again, this is highly simplified. We don't have any information about their other assets, their other income. This is why it's extremely important for landowners to run the numbers with your own advisors. If it's a qualifying farmer or rancher who can deduct up to 100% of their AGI, they could net $800,000 in deductions from this highly simplified example. Estate tax benefits. Peter Bernardin will expand upon this in his presentation. But in general, if you reduce the value of your estate, your heirs will pay less taxes on that estate. If you get rid of the land altogether from your estate through selling it or donating, even if you leave that land to an entity like Greenbelt in your will, that's no longer in your estate and your heirs won't pay any taxes on that. If you have a conservation restriction on your property, that's going to suppress the value of your property, which is going to lower the amount that your heirs are taxed on. This might not matter for federal estate tax purposes because the exemptions are quite high right now, unless you're lucky enough to go above that. But it might help on the Massachusetts side, where the exemption is still at $2 million per individual. Interestingly, under the federal code, conservation restrictions provide a bonus 40% exclusion on the value of restricted land. That's over and above the reduction in value conferred by the conservation restriction itself. So if you have a conservation restriction on land that you inherit, that could reduce the value for calculating state taxes up to an additional $500,000. If you have any questions on that, ask Peter. Remember I talked about a bargain sale, which is a partial sale of your land, you get compensated for a portion of your land's value, you sell it below market value, and you're donating a portion of the value of your land or value of your conservation restriction. Well, why would you want to do that? If you're paid for your land, you may incur capital gains taxes, depending on how long you've owned your land, when you inherited your land, and many other factors that we aren't privy to. The charitable gift component of that, the amount that you donate through a bargain sale of a conservation restriction value of land or conservation restriction, can offset those capital gains. I have read of cases, many, where landowners have actually come out ahead selling land or a conservation restriction below market value, somewhat below market value, such that it offsets their capital gains. They come out ahead versus selling their property at full market value with the capital gains they may have on that. Again, run the numbers with your own financial and tax advisors to figure out how you can maximize these benefits. What we're providing to you are concepts. We can give you citations of the tax code to share with your advisors. but it really behooves you to work with someone who's qualified and can help you understand these benefits and maximize them. Massachusetts has a conservation land tax credit. If through donating your land or doing a bargain sale of your land or conservation restriction, you donate at least $150,000 worth of value, the state will give you a tax credit of $75,000. This is refundable, so let's say you owe $5,000 in taxes in the year of your gift, that means the state will send you a check for $70,000. There's only $2 million a year available in Massachusetts for this. We keep trying to get Massachusetts to put more in, but this is not a good time to do that. So this is a first come, first served basis. The last I heard, there was a 2 to 3 year wait list for this. But if this is something that can be part of a financial compensation package for preserving your land, Greenbelt is happy to work with you on this. How is my land or conservation restriction gift valued? Jim will go into a lot more detail on this, but at a very high level, the value of your land donation is simply the fair market value of your land. That fair market value has a very specific definition. If you stuck a for sale sign in your property, as it is right now, the fair market value is the price that a willing, knowledgeable buyer would pay a willing, knowledgeable seller when neither party has to buy or sell the land. The value of a donated conservation restriction is determined by the difference between the value of your land right now and the value of your land after the restriction is in place. After those development rights are extinguished, your land's going to have a lower value. So the difference between those is the value of your conservation restriction and the value of your potential deduction for tax benefit purposes. So for example, if you have land that's worth $1 million, let's say your conservation restriction eliminates a couple of house lots, and after the conservation restriction is in place, your land is now worth $300,000. What's the value of your conservation restriction? Jim.
$700,000.
Thank you. $700,000. Again, that's the value that you're potentially eligible to take as an income tax deduction or to qualify you for a tax credit. Treasury regulations require the donor, that's you, the landowner, to obtain a qualified appraisal prepared by a qualified appraiser. And the IRS has really started cracking down on this, so we highly recommend that you work with appraisers that are highly experienced in doing conservation appraisals. The IRS has a very strict specifications for appraisals, as does the state. So you want an appraiser who can write reports that meet those specifications. Again, we are not advisors. What I've just presented to you are concepts. That's how I think of taxes. I don't even do my own taxes. So it really behooves you to work with your own advisors to make sure that you can most benefit from these tax benefits. Can I leave my land to Greenbelt in my will? Why, yes, you can. We strongly urge you to talk to us first. Not only do you want the assurance, I'm sure, that we want your land, that it is consistent with the types of land that we protect and manage long term, but we also want to understand what your goals are for the land, to make sure that we do manage it forever in ways that you want to see it managed. Of course, if you leave land to us in your will, you'll miss out on tax benefits during your lifetime. It can help your heirs, but you'll miss out on the income tax benefits or potential tax credit that I just described. Can I gift or sell my land now to Greenbelt, but keep living on it and using it for the rest of your life? Yes, you can, through a tool called a reserved life estate. The disadvantage of that is you remain responsible for upkeep and management of your land and paying full freight on all the taxes until you're no longer around. You can still realize the tax benefits I described by giving your land now and retaining a reserved life estate, but those tax benefits will be reduced by the retained life estate. So I've just thrown a lot of information at you. You're not expected to remember it or even understand it all in detail. You might be feeling like this. That's normal. That's how I feel. No, just kidding. And I want to reassure you that we are here to help you. There is a broad range of individual circumstances out there. And between all of us at Greenbelt, we have many years of experience and we've probably seen all of them. We are advisors who can work together with your other advisors, people like Jim and Peter, who together, we have the resources to help you get where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow in terms of your financial goals, your estate planning goals, and your conservation goals. And we don't charge for our time. So we are happy to meet with you anytime, anywhere, for as long as it takes for you to get comfortable with the idea of conserving your land. Or maybe you'll decide that's not the right thing for you. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples before I pass this on to Jim Monahan. Janice and her late husband, Pearlie Bailey, approached us because this was the farm that Pearlie had grown up on, had inherited from his family, and he never wanted to see it developed. They did not need to sell a conservation restriction or sell their land, but they wanted more than anything in the world to ensure it was never developed. And when I mentioned the state tax credit to them, they said, well, of course, sure, that would be great. So what we suggested to them, they had these two pieces of land on either side of the road. We suggested that they do 2 donations to us spaced several years apart so that they could benefit from the tax credit, the Massachusetts Conservation Land Tax Credit, twice. So first, they donated a conservation restriction on their farmland portion. At that time in 2012, the tax credit was only $50,000, so that's what they received for conserving the land on the west side of the road with a conservation restriction. 5 years later, they donated the land across the street to Greenbelt and were able to receive the tax credit again, which at that time had gone up to $75,000. So staggering your donations like this is also a strategy for maximizing your income tax deduction, or maybe a strategy for offsetting capital gains on maybe other property, even in another part of the state that you're selling at that time. So these are the strategies that you have at your disposal to talk through with your advisors to try to maximize the tax benefits. For this next example, I want you to imagine that you've grown up on family land. You've raised your family on this land where you grew up, and now your son is raising his family on the family farm. The problem is you only own half the land. The other half was inherited by a whole other wing of the family that lives on the other side of the country. And that half of the family has no emotional ties to the land, no emotional ties to you, because they live on the other side of the world, and they want to sell the land because they don't want to pay property taxes anymore. They don't need the land, so they want their money out, as is their right. The family that lives on the property wants to own the property forever and wants to make sure it can never be developed. So this was the challenge that was presented to us when a family reached out to us for help preserving the land. They couldn't afford to buy out the other half of the family. So here's what we did. This is what happens when land gets passed down through the generations. Without adequate estate planning, ownership gets fragmented among more and more owners. And inevitably, instead of siblings, it's cousins, people live far away, and people have different goals and different needs. And that can lead to very complicated land dispositions. The more landowners you have, the more interest at stake you have, the more interest, the higher risk of misaligned goals. One half of the family wants income, the other half of the family wants to keep the land. And that can often, sadly, all too often lead to family strife. And we've seen that over and over and over again. So of course, that complicates deciding the future of the land. So in this case, what Greenbelt came up with, we negotiated a purchase of everything for $800,000. The cash would go to the family on the West Coast, effectively buying them out. The land, the value that was left in the land would stay with the Massachusetts family. How did we do that? We brought in conservation partners. We brought in the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation to buy a little over 55 acres. This land was adjacent to a existing state forest. So the state added these acres to the state forest. And then we worked with the town that the property was in to require a conservation restriction on the farm. And between those two, that's how we raised the money to effectively buy out the West Coast family and allow the North Shore family to 100% own the farm. Before I leave you, I want to give you additional resources. The University of Massachusetts, through their Cooperative Extension Program, has a fantastic webinar series that is there. It's actually in progress right now, but they've done this several times. They have all their recordings online for free. They are excellent 1-hour webinars by experts across Massachusetts that are deeper dives into the topics I've presented on tonight. So I strongly encourage you to use that resource. Everything's at masswoods.org. There's also an excellent series of books, primarily focusing on the benefits of conservation restrictions and especially how to maximize the tax benefits of conservation restrictions. These were actually written by an attorney who wrote the tax code that allows that created the federal income tax deduction for donating conservation restrictions. They're excellent, well-written, very, like, as someone who doesn't do her own taxes, easy to understand. All right, Jim, take it away.
Keep the clicker. So that's me. So, hi everyone, my name is Jim Monahan. I'm a land planner and real estate appraiser. And I was just thinking as Vanessa was speaking, I think I appraised my first conservation easement in 1988. So, been at it a little while, and you know, seen tax codes change and real estate market dynamics change, but there are certain fundamentals about the process of appraising a conservation easement or quantifying the value of development rights on property that have remained constant. And the process that I'm going to kind of walk you through, I brought along one quick example of a project here on the North Shore, and part of what I want to do today is dispel some, you know, either confusing points or misconceptions about how complicated this conservation planning process is. If you're sitting here, you know, taking in all this information, it can appear a little bit daunting, you know, and ask yourself, well, where do I start? And I think, you know, another common theme that I've seen is that these projects take a long time, typically. I'll get a call, you know, in year one, and I meet with a family, just on a consulting basis, lay out your goals, let's have a quick look at your property. It's a very, very slow kind of baby step incremental approach to this. And I take that information back and I say, okay, we'll call, you know, I share some information or some insights with them at that initial meeting. We might call back 3 years later and say, well, you know, something's changed or we've refined our thinking, we'd like to move to the next step. So it's not, you know, and there's never any need to lay out $30,000 for a surveyor to delineate all the wetlands on a property or just shell out a lot of money before you have the basic answers. And the most basic answer you can look for early on is to, as Vanessa said, run the numbers. You don't know what kind of opportunities are available or what kind of trouble you may be in tax-wise or what kind of tax challenges you might face until you understand, even in kind of back of the napkin stage, what the numbers look like. So this example here, and this is a quick run through of the before and after appraisal process. Again, we're trying, as an appraiser, I'm trying to quantify the market value of a relatively abstract set of rights to a property. It's, you know, conservation easement or other kinds of land protection methods were stripping the development rights off the property. So how do you go about valuing that? So what we do as a first step is map a property, and again, you don't need, we have a lot of digital mapping data that's available at our fingertips now that wasn't available in 1988. So I can put together a composite base plan like this. So this happens to be a farm here on the North Shore. It's a real project. It was about 156 acres in active farming use, multi-generational ownership. You know, it had all the intrigue. And you know, again, DEP wetlands are delineated, and we've got NRCS soils and FEMA floodplain data. We can make a composite sandwich and look at all of that information and start to draw some basic conclusions about what kind of development potential a property might have. In this case, it was pretty, you know, the soils were excellent. It had a lot of public road frontage in 2 different locations, and as a land planner, it was pretty easy one to evaluate. So the next step in the process is to illustrate what we call the highest and best use, and this basically approximates the way a developer would look at the property. It's not always a pretty picture, but it serves as a financial model in valuing the property. In this case, I cut the property into 32-ish lots, and that was this is not a plan that we need to bring in front of the planning board. You know, as an appraiser, I'll call a town planner and say, you know, ask for some interpretation of some regulations, and might run a concept plan by a town planner just to get it basically vetted. But these plans don't incorporate any heroic assumptions about rezoning or zoning variances or lots of design waivers. It's basically as of right, this is how I could develop my property if I were so inclined. And in the valuation process, I look to the market metrics, that whatever the current market condition is, and we assign retail level values to each one of those lots. And as a good, you know, self-respecting developer would do, they'll back out all their costs, including their profit, and then we arrive at an as-is value of the property as of the day I see it, an effective valuation date. And that serves as the before valuation and the before and after process. And it's a benchmark value that we refer to once again. So then we get the green paint out and we strip off the development rights. So where there were 32 lots, in this case, the family, their objective was to preserve the property, and they were really at a point where they were trying to decide whether we sell the whole thing and move to New Hampshire, or try to make a run of it and endow the property so that we can carry it on to the next generation. So they weren't in a position to give away a lot of value. Their goal was to realize pretty much 100% of the value of those bundle of rights. So what we did in this case, and this, you know, this could be a conservation easement, all the green, or in this case it was an agricultural preservation restriction, which involved a cash purchase using state funds to buy down the development rights of 25 lots on the property. So the before value is the benchmark value. Then I value the property according to this. So we reserved 5 unrestricted building envelopes for the next generation. All the kids had an interest in the property. And the rest of the APR land was limited to ag uses and some limited solar and the same kind of stipulations you'd see in a conservation restriction. And the combination of value components here, so the cash value of the development rights that were sold, together with the per acre value of the encumbered land, the restricted land, and the value of the retained real estate, came out to 100% of the value of the pre-restriction value. So no money was lost or sacrificed along the way in this case. And you know, this before and after process holds true for whether you have 5 acres or 500 acres. It's not the way I value conservation easements. It's industry accepted way that they're valued, and that the IRS accepts the valuation methodology. And again, it doesn't have to be done all at once. It can be, there are instances, more simple cases where somebody may own 10 or 12 acres. And this gets into the sort of the misconception that a conservation easement, you're going to lose, or the actual cash value of a conservation easement after taxes might be 30%, 30 cents on the dollar. There are ways, if you have a 12-acre property and you've got a nice house and some additional development potential, the value of the core property plus 2 or 3 additional lots, in a situation where you have kind of a 50-50 distribution between kind of the core estate value and the excess land value, we've seen plenty of times when people, our marketing folks, see this all the time. People put the property on the market based on appraised value, which might be a house and 2 or 3 additional lots. And listings like that can languish on the market because that property is kind of in no man's land in the market. So a developer doesn't want to pay for the house, and somebody that's interested in the house doesn't want to pay for the excess land. So there are ways that you can write down the value in a smaller example of those excess development rights and enhance the value of the house on the 6 acres and kind of quantify or better position the property for successful marketing. So there are a lot of little nuances that, on a property by property basis that go into this equation. So I'm happy to answer plenty of other questions when our time comes, but just wanted to kind of run you through that fairly local example. And again, it's the tried and true method. So thank you.
Are there any immediate questions before we move on to Peter Bernardin's presentation? We will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so great. Thank you, Jim.
Pass the clicker.
Good, pass the clicker. So I just go forward. Just one correction before I start. Vanessa mentioned that she'd used my website to generate my bio. So when you said I've been practicing 20 years, I didn't get looking like this after 20 years. Rode hard and put away wet. I've been practicing for 36 years, but now I know I need to update my website a little bit. So I specialize in estate planning, and you can probably guess that everybody who sits down has a different story, has a different family dynamic. So one of the things I love about my job is not so much the drafting, but sitting down with folks and talking about their family and trying to help them address some of the issues that they're facing. And so it's all right, I was kind of hoping they'd all populate at once, but I noticed you stopped right at saving the family farm. Was that by accident? So everybody comes and they whether they've kind of thought about it a lot or thought about it a little, they have got some concerns. Sometimes they have family dynamics and family situations that they're not always initially comfortable talking about, but memorializing wishes, planning to make sure that a farm or a family business is kind of, from my perspective, a lot of overlap between the two. Estate taxes are always a big issue, avoiding probate, providing for children, and addressing family issues. That's kind of the typical first meeting. We cover a lot of ground, and there's a huge learning curve. And it sometimes takes more than one meeting, but we work our way through it. Okay. But I'm not too smart. I like to break things down into little manageable pieces. And so I talk about things in, okay, where are your assets gonna go? Let's talk about the possible estate tax. And then with people with closely held businesses and family farms, that's actually one of the trickiest conversations that we have, because unless every family member is involved in the farm or in the business, there's gonna be some challenges. And I, don't raise your hand, but everybody in this room has had an experience of, we got one kid in the business but 3 kids who aren't, or I've got one kid who helped out on the farm but the 2 that have moved off. And it just makes it really difficult because parents want all their kids to feel equally loved, kind of a universal. And it's hard to do that sometimes. So, even in this session, it's been humbling. I've learned some stuff in this session. So my wife's told me I'm an idiot for years, and I'm beginning to think she's right. But there's a lot of, we keep saying tax, tax, tax. And there's a lot of taxes out there, and they all have a different set of rules. So income tax and the transfer tax are the 2 biggest. You know, the income tax is a tax on the way into your bucket of assets. So it's technical as accretion to wealth. So when your bucket expands, it generally expands because of a taxable event. So you pay an income tax on the way into your bucket. And then we have a transfer tax. Anytime you take anything out of your bucket of assets, you've got to consider the transfer tax, which you know as during life, a gift tax, and at death, an estate tax. I'm focusing mostly on the transfer tax issues and using the exemptions to the transfer tax to achieve the best result possible for my client. But it's not the only result we have to keep our eye on. So we have, one of my main tools is a revocable trust. There's 1,000 different kinds of trusts, and there's revocable and irrevocable, and there's grantor trusts. There's so many different names that we hang off of these things. But I really, and I've been doing this, like I said, for 36 years, and I still don't know whether this is a metaphor or an analogy, but I tell folks to think of it like a shopping cart. I know I've got somebody in the room who's going to tell me afterwards whether it's a metaphor or analogy, but the shopping cart it's a vehicle that we create to hold your assets. Really, that's all we're going to use it for, because we're going to create it, we're going to transfer assets in, and then you continue to manage and operate and enjoy the benefits from the trust. You won't notice a difference to a revocable trust, but from my perspective, what I've done is I've taken assets that otherwise have to go through probate because they're trapped in your mortal hands, and now they're in a trust that doesn't get sick when you get sick and doesn't die when you die. So by creating this trust, I'm able to take the probate process off the table. I'm able to include language in there that talks about, well, my kids are young, I want them to be at least this age. Include language that says, you know, my kids are great, but one has a substance abuse issue and one makes a lot of bad choices with their mates. Big issue now is gambling. It's really become an issue for a lot of folks. But the trust allows you to address all that, and it's a really flexible tool. But we create it to memorialize your wishes. It's a contract between you and the trustee. But that's my visual. You get a shopping cart, we put the right assets in, you continue to operate and enjoy the benefits of the trust on a revocable trust. Like I said, there are many types of irrevocable trusts as well. So one of my challenges is typically helping folks understand kind of the limitations of a trust. And the fact that you put into your trust that you want the family business to continue to run into perpetuity, always for the benefit of my bloodline, or the fact that you put into the trust that I want my family farm to always remain in my bloodline under these conditions, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen. Because one of the things that we always have to discuss is there are no trust police. The people who are able to enforce the terms of the trust are the people who have an interest in the trust, and really nobody else. So if you have a family member who's acting as trustee and only family members who are beneficiaries, then quite often after you're gone, I have these meetings with the kids, and the kids all agree that the parents are idiots, and what were they thinking? We don't need an ongoing trust. And so there's ways around it, but it is something that you have to understand, that there are no trust police, and you have to consider the possibility of people thinking, second guessing some of the structures that you've put in place. So when it comes to land preservation, you do have options, and my job is to represent my clients. I do a lot of work with land preservation. I'm on the Boxford Land Committee. So it is something I'm interested in, but I always start with, listen, you have the ability to do nothing. You don't have to take steps to preserve the land. You can allow your children to decide what's going to happen after you're gone, but do the children have the same goals and objectives? Are they as connected? Do they feel the same way? Do their spouses feel the same way? We all hope our kids get married and have wonderful relationships, but the reality is spouses quite often have a different perspective than your kids. Do all your kids get along? It's not uncommon for even families with 2 kids to spend a lot of time discussing what's going to happen. And are they financially responsible and able to continue with the property? Everyone here has struggled for years to make the mortgage payments and pay the bills, and it's a lot. We have some tools that we've already talked about the conservation restriction. My example, which I want to talk about tonight, and I don't have slides, because obviously I'm sensitive about confidentiality, but I sat down with a very elderly farmer who I've been talking with for a lot of years, because he just couldn't make the right decision, or a decision that worked for him and his family. But he had some pretty serious health issues, and so we had to get serious about the discussions. And he really, really wanted to make sure that the farm continued, but he was concerned about what the kids would do, and he was also concerned about the estate tax issues, because the farm had value, but his estate wouldn't have any liquidity. And so he was faced with this situation where if he had died with the land completely unprotected, he was pretty sure the kids, A, wouldn't carry out his wishes, and he loved his kids, and they weren't going to be jerks about it, but it wasn't going to happen. And B, they probably wouldn't be able to keep it because of some of the estate tax issues. So I called Vanessa, and I said, Vanessa, I think I need your help. And what we did was we also got Jim involved, I think, at some point, and we took the parcel and we reserved the house lot because you wanted to make sure that the kids would have the right to live or build on the house lot, and then we preserved everything else. And what that allowed us to do was basically guarantee that the rest of that land, the land that was preserved, would always be farmable. If not by his family, then by somebody else. And we also brought the value down below the filing threshold. The CR was that powerful a tool. So we were able to make sure we were able to make it much more likely that his plans would be respected. And we also saved the family some estate taxes. I guess probably it's incumbent upon me to talk a little bit about estate taxes. So buckle up. Basically, you have on your death, the public policy from the 1930s was they wanted to avoid concentrations of wealth. So the original plan was we're going to break up these really wealthy families by not allowing them to pass value from one generation to the next. You can keep your assets while you're alive, but on your death, we're going to levy a tax. That tax has always included a provision that says some value can pass to the next generation or anybody you want to leave it to. That estate tax exemption for federal purposes right now is $15 million per taxpayer, pretty much automatically doubled if you're married, so it's $30 million adjusted for inflation. For Massachusetts purposes, it's $2 million, but it's not automatically doubled. So it takes some extra planning to make sure that you don't lose the exemption on the first spouse to die. And so, as a really quick example, if Jim and I were married and we're both worth $2 million, despite his picture, he's older than me. Did you get your brother to sit for that picture?
The picture was from 1988.
Well, okay. So we're both worth, say, $3 million each. He passes away first because he's much older than I am. And he has the typical I love you will. So his will says I leave everything to my spouse, and mine says the same thing. He dies first. I'm now worth $6 million. I only have my own $2 million exemption. So I have a $4 million taxable estate. Using a very basic trust, we could have said, both of our trusts would say the same thing. If I'm the first spouse to die, I don't want to lose my exemption. So I'm going to keep $2 million right here in front of me in my trust like I'm still around, and everything else goes to my spouse. So now Jim's trust is worth $2 million. I'm worth $4 million. With my exemption, I only have a $2 million taxable estate. So use of a trust does allow you to save estate taxes, but it's all based on the value that goes into that bucket. And the value you can control during life using some tools. With business assets, we do LLCs to kind of reduce the marketability and control, so that when a business appraiser comes through and they're valuing the business, we haven't got a $7 million business that goes into the bucket of assets. We have a $4.5 million business that goes into the bucket of assets. And it's the same approach with real estate, where instead of putting the full value of the full market value, which is, you did a nice job explaining, it's not your assessed value, it's what a willing buyer would pay, and that is why Jim has to get all sexy with the let's figure out how many house lots we could fit on there. And so, I deal with folks all the time who will say, well, my property's assessed at $300,000, and when you look at the market value, it's $5 million. Because it's got waterfront, and they can put 3 or 4 lots on there, and they can get a bunch of house lots. That's the value that's included on your estate tax return. Not your assessed value, not what your neighbor will pay. It's what a willing buyer would pay after they look at subdivision potential, joining it. It's always more than you expect. So we want to try to control that value, and a really effective tool is conservation restriction. So I don't think I have too much more. There's some redundancy here because I really wasn't sure what other people would cover. But I will say that the example I gave, the farm is still operating, the family's still talking to each other. Like I said, they didn't have to file an estate tax return. So I think this is mostly repetitive though. And I know you guys want to get back to food and cookies.
We have plenty of time, Peter.
You guys did a really good job of covering this.
Repetition's okay.
No, I shouldn't have made fun of Jim. You put my picture from 20 years ago up there too.
We were an attractive couple back then.
You were the closest person. I didn't want to offend anyone else by marrying them, so I'm sorry if that made anyone uncomfortable.
And Annie Madden, a few minutes to talk about why they preserve their land, and then all of us are available for questions after they're finished with that. So Annie, do you want to start?
Sure, you want me to go? Oh,
Sure.
thanks everybody for being here. I'm Annie Madden. I live out back, as they say, practically on the Byfield line in our lovely town. My husband and I decided about 10 years ago that we loved the land that we lived on so much that we never wanted to see it developed. And we happened to be pretty familiar with Greenbelt. As Vanessa said, I've been involved there for quite a while, so I understood some of these options. And so we were pretty clear that something that would work for us was a conservation restriction on our property. We have 22 acres there. Most of it's wetlands and woods and a long driveway, and it only had one potentially developable parcel. And so we were able to extinguish that developable lot and donate the CR to Greenbelt. And we put 19 acres in the conservation restriction, but we still, as owners of that property, still have all those reserved rights that we can use the property for harvesting firewood, for making trails, for promoting wildlife habitat, and the things that we really find so magical about it. We live not too far from the Alwells back there, in a funny part of West Newbury that's all rock and ledge and really different than a lot of the agricultural land here. It's really quite unique back there, and that's what we wanted to preserve, and Greenbelt really gave us the tools to do it. There were some incentives, some monetary incentives, but that wasn't what was driving us. We were just really wanted to preserve it the way it is. So that's a pretty simple topic compared to what these guys had to give you.
Thanks,
Can you see me, or do you want me to come? Paulina Swartz, I live on Main Street. Our land backs into the riverbed conservation area. And we also did a CR on about 8 acres, and it's probably the best decision that we've ever made. Few things that you do in your life will last forever, but I'm pretty sure this is gonna come close to lasting forever. And to know that nobody can put up houses, roads, lawns, all the things I don't like, on that land is very comforting. So Vanessa mentioned this concept of emotional connection. That's what drove the decision. I have walked that land for 30 years every day. I'm skiing these days because of the snow. And so I know life there. I know the birds, the mammals, the pollinators, and you see this life, and you know what's going to happen if the land gets developed. It's affected, and you may say, 8 acres, that makes no difference in the grand scheme of things, and it doesn't make any difference, let's be honest. But for those creatures in that neighborhood, it's everything. It's everything if you imagine houses there. And I don't think of it as a conservation restriction. I think of it as a conservation protection and restriction, because for us it's about protecting. And the value of that conservation restriction and protection has gone up in the last 10 years. Where we live next to Page School, I think it's 10 to 12 houses have gone up on open space in the last 10 years. It's devastating. And of course for those families it's great. I love that we are creating homes for people, but the creatures that were there are even more squeezed. So the fact that we chose to do this is very important, even more important. And it all started, I had one of those flyers sent to me at home. I didn't know Greenbelt. I didn't know anything about them. And then I was so fortunate to meet Vanessa, and she was amazing to work with.
Yeah.
Such a nice person, knowledgeable, super responsive to our needs and concerns. And so yeah, I became a fan of Greenbelt, and then I graduated to super fan when I became a board member. So I've been a board member for 3 years. So the reason I asked the question about where does the money come from for all this business is because I'm on the board. We raise the money, not the board, the staff raised the money for these projects. So even if you don't look after land right now, think about us in your estate plans, in your charitable giving, because a lot of the money that we use to buy and protect the land comes from people who care. So you don't have to own land to be able to protect land conservation. So I hope you'll consider it, and thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. And Annie, thank you so much. So now we can open it up to general questions and answers. And if you don't have any concern, oh, good.